Cool beans. We're going to go ahead and start recording. I'm going to go ahead and start a little bit about this session. This session will explore how the implicit bias fuels racism on the interpersonal level and in our synagogues, camps, and other Jewish institutions. We will learn how Mussar applied through Jewish ethics can be used in daily practice to erode the implicit bias and create relationships and institutions that honor the Tzlem, Elohim, and the divine image in every person. It is a huge pleasure to introduce two amazing people. Rabbi David Jaffe is the founder of Kirva Institute, where he leads the inside-out wisdom and the action, or known as the IOWA, a project dedicated to integrating Penimiyut, Jewish spiritual wisdom with the action for social change. He is the author of Changing the World from Inside Out, which won the 2016 National Jewish Book Award. David teaches Mussar and Beslov Chassidut through the North American with such groups as the Institutions for Jewish Spirituality, the Mussar Institute and Preside, as well. He is visiting a research fellow at the Boston University School of Technology, Religion, and Conflict Transformation Program, as well as the instructor in the Hebrew College Rabbinical School. Rabbi serves on the executive committee of the Brockton Interfaith Community, a grassroots organizing group dedicated to building multi-racial, multi-faith community to work for the economic and racial justice. David has received his rabbinical ordination in Israel in 2014. Next, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, another amazing person. Yehudah Webster is passionate about ensuring the Jewish community's commitment to fight for racial justice and a collective liberation. With an analysis of unconditional revolutionary care, Yehudah has worked as an anti-oppression trainer and an organizational consultant, developing unique programs to bring together communities that are often pitted against each other. He has presented in a wide variety of settings, including youth group conventions, college campuses, and staff development retreats for Jewish organizations. As a community organizer for the Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, or also known as JFREJ, Yehudah supports JFREJ's policy, accountability, and transformative justice campaigns through grassroots efforts that include lobbying for legislative reform. Yehudah has worked on establishing a national support of networks for Jews of color through his JFREJ leadership, working to provide as much needed institutional support marginalized for Jewish communities of colors of need. He is grateful for JFREJ's Grace Palais Organizing Fellowship and Bend the Arc Sella Leadership Program. So with that doing say, I want to hand it off to Rabbi David.
Eddie, thank you so much. It's great to be here. And also thank you, Rashmuli, for inviting us. Love doing programs with both Rashmuli and any one of the manifestations that you do and put out into the world. It's great to be with you all and to get to do this with my colleague Yehudah. Want to ask people while we're getting started here to just write in the chat what brings you, what interests you in this particular webinar. We're going to be talking about implicit bias as a key aspect of racism in our relationships institutions. Yehudah will be talking most about that. And then we're going to look at the Jewish spiritual practice of Mussar as a spiritual technology for really taking on racism and taking on implicit bias. And we'll give an example of a practice of that as we get into this a little more. So I do invite you, if you can, to write in the chat what interested you about this particular webinar, and we'll take a look at that as we go forward. I think Eddie did a very full job introducing, so I'm not going to say a lot more about myself. But the Inside Out Wisdom and Action Project, I do want to say a word that this is a project that I run that is dedicated to mining the Jewish tradition for Jewish spiritual wisdom that is transformative both on the inner and personal level, but also transformative on the social and communal level, moving us towards collective liberation. And I invite all of you to check it out. We're online, Inside Out Wisdom in Action, and if so moved to join us in what we're doing. So with that, I want to turn it over to Yehudah to take us through a look at implicit bias and the impact of that on our communities.
Thanks so much, Rabbi David. Peace, everybody. Shalom. My name's Yehudah. I live in Brooklyn, Crown Heights. I'm an organizer with Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and also do this sort of political education around implicit racism and anti-racism and anti-Semitism. And so we're going to start off with just a quick riddle, actually, to really start this conversation about implicit bias, something that we really all have. And I'm curious if we'll be able to put people into a quick breakout room for about 2 to 3 minutes after I share this riddle. And so the riddle goes, there's a son and a father, and they're on their Sunday drive, let's say, and they get in a terrible accident, okay? And upon arrival, you know, the 911 is called immediately, and upon arrival, the EMTs immediately pronounce the father dead on site, and he's taken away to the morgue. The son is in critical condition, and the EMTs rush him to the hospital. And he's in the ICU, and they call for the surgeon of the hospital. And when the surgeon comes into the room, the surgeon takes one look at the boy and says, "I can't operate on this boy, for he is my son." How is this possible? Okay, and so if you could put folks into a breakout room and just discuss for 2 minutes, how is this possible? Who is this surgeon? And we will come back and we'll discuss in just 2 minutes, okay? So if you could put folks into groups of pairs, possibly.
Yehudah, do you think you can help me? I don't have that much experience with Zoom and seeing how to do breakout rooms. I'm gonna go ahead and make you the admin.
Okay, that'd be great. And if it's up, I'm the host. All right, let's see here. So I think what's happening here, and no worries, this is a setting that has to be set before the video is started. So I still don't have the breakout room capability. What I will say is, instead, why don't we just take a few moments to think about it, and as you have ideas of who this surgeon can be, just put them into the chat. All right, and in a few moments we'll begin a little discussion about how is this possible, who's the surgeon. So again, a quick recap. As you're thinking about the answer here, there's father and son. They're in a terrible accident. The father is pronounced dead on the scene. Son's rushed to the emergency room. The surgeon of the hospital is called, and when the surgeon arrives, takes one look at the boy and says, "I can't operate on this boy, for he is my son." How is this possible? Who is the surgeon? Okay, so think about it, and let's just take until 5:09 to put things in the chat, and then we'll discuss. So I see some good options going on here in this chat. Anyone want to unmute themselves and just take a dive and share what they think? Who's the surgeon?
I think that the chat has revealed all the possibilities that it's getting at our bias of what the gender a surgeon might be. So initially, well, a surgeon is male, so how could, posing part of the riddle, but there's many options as people revealed. Two male parents, the surgeon is a woman, it's a foster parent, it's a biological parent. So all hinging on our, again, initial unexamined bias.
Thanks for that, Joel. And that's really what this is all getting to. And thanks for making that really explicit already, is that, for many of us, I think somebody initially put, in their childhood, this is a riddle that kind of goes in, I think, in generations. And so some people heard this riddle as a kid, potentially, right? And so you knew that the answer was the mother, right? And the point here is that for many of us, still to this day, the unconscious association that a surgeon is a male is so strong that even when you're engaging in an implicit bias training, people will go to the far lengths to say that this person, that the surgeon, that the kid had gay parents, right? They'll go to the far lengths to say that the surgeon is a foster parent, okay? Right, and so because that association is so strong, the surgeon is a male. And so this kind of gets to the point about implicit bias and the reality that we all have implicit bias. And in many ways, this is really a highly functional biological feature, right? You can imagine, and it still is today, but thousands of years ago when we had to hunt for our food, it was really, really important, right? As you were hunting, this could be the difference between life and death, having this highly biological tool that could do this unconscious processing. Because as a bear or a predator comes at you, you don't have time to consciously think, wow, they have really large teeth and big fur and sharp claws, and oh, I should run. No, we developed the ability, or we're made with the ability to quickly process certain characteristics and to associate that with danger, and to make the split-second decision to run and save our lives, right? Unfortunately, in today's world, this highly functional biological feature has been weaponized to reinforce negative associations with a person's characteristics, right? And so, while explicit racism has been illegal for the most part, and today is seen as widely immoral, Black people and people of color, we continue to experience the harsh discriminatory impact of racism as it continues to live in all of us unconsciously. And you might hear me using the word unconscious racism or implicit racism interchangeably, and really only the difference here is that unconscious racism points to ideas or associations that are truly unconscious. And we say implicit racism when we know that they exist and yet they still produce a certain set of reactions and behaviors because of the ways and the power of this unconscious processing. Okay, so that's the key distinction between unconscious and implicit racism. And so it's this implicit racism that, really affects everything that we do, from where we walk, to where we eat, to who we hire, to who we promote, to who we fire, right? And, on the personal level, as I reflect on it, it's what really would produce, I used to live in a moisture house. And for those who don't know, moisture house builds community for folks in their 20s and 30s. And so I lived in moisture house for 3 years in Brooklyn. And I was a door greeter. And we would have 40, 50 people over for Shabbat dinner. And it was a common thing. As I opened the door, there would be apparent confusion, instant confusion on many faces. And it's that implicit racism, it's that unconscious processing that produced the confusion, because the association of Jewish and Black is not there because of the centuries of purposeful dissociation or a particular association of skin color with Jewishness, right? It's what really motivated a mob of Hasidic Jews to harass me in front of my house for carrying a Torah scroll, because in their mind, with the conscious associations that they have, a black man has no business carrying a Torah scroll, right? And on an institutional level, it's what continuously motivates the under prioritizing of the learning of customs, traditions, and histories of Jewish people of color. And I can really attest to that on all levels of education, everywhere from Hebrew school. I remember the first time I ever learned about Sephardic Judaism, or the only time I learned about Sephardic Judaism, was in reference to Pesach, and that Sephardic Jews could eat rice. And I grew up in a predominantly, I grew up in South Orange, New Jersey, predominantly white, Jewish, Ashkenazi community, and I only ever heard about Sephardic Judaism in that kind of context. And when I went to college, and I went to List College, which is the joint program with Columbia and the Jewish Theological Seminary, I only learned about, I had rare opportunity to learn about Jews of color or their histories, customs, and traditions. There was only one class about Ladino that was taught, and there were many classes about history that were taught at JTS, right? And it's not any particular person's fault at that institution, but this is the power and the manifestation of the ways in which implicit racism could manifest on an institutional level. The deprioritization of learning about certain culture, traditions, histories, etc. Right, and one other point, reference that I'd point to before passing it back over to Rabbi David, is to say, another example of the manifestation of implicit racism, particularly within the Jewish context, is if you look at the resources, the allocation of resources in our community. There's a clear, you can see the priorities, mostly going to white Ashkenazi institutions. And it's taken a lot of organizing for Jews of color and organizations that are led by Jews of color to start to get funding from major Jewish institutions, right? And so that has taken a lot of work over the years. So I don't know if we should pause at all for any questions or clarifying questions about how implicit racism works, but I think at any time, if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll see if and when we can get to it. Rabbi David? You're muted, Rabbi.
Yeah, let's keep an eye on the chat. We'll see if things come up. I know Joel's writing here. There are perhaps it turns on context. Okay, there's a question about whether that was really gender bias or not. There might be heterosexist assumptions. Right, there's a number of assumptions that might be going on there. Let's keep an eye on the chat. Before I'm going to introduce the Jewish spiritual discipline of Mussar and how that could be useful here. Before I do it, Yehudah, I wonder just if you want to say a word about care and the role of care as you see it as a way of challenging implicit bias and racism.
Absolutely. So in many of the trainings and workshops that I lead, I bring people to an understanding that there are many avenues of anti-racism, and that depends on a whole host of factors that we won't have time to get into here today. And on an institutional level, there's an understanding that we have to dismantle racism by shifting the focal points of power within our community, within our world. But also on an individual level, I think it's important to understand, how do we start to undo these unconscious associations, these negative associations that we've made with certain characteristics, fueling negative feelings and fueling behavior that is unwanted by us ourselves, right? And I think that the way that we can start to really undo these unconscious associations is through concrete acts of care. Research and our Jewish tradition supports the notion that it's behavior that has more effects on our attitudes than our attitudes have in our behavior, right? And so just in the sense that we give tzedakah before we I gave tzedakah long before I even understood the impact of what charity was, before I had real understanding of what charity was. I used to drop the nickel in every day at Hebrew school or whatever, right? And that's because our tradition understands that the behavior is what starts to shape your attitudes. And so as we start to invest in concrete acts of care for people of color, we can start to shift the unconscious associations that we have towards people of color and Black folks. And I think I'll leave it there, and I think that'll be a nice transition.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. That sets up what I'd like to do now. And I'm gonna talk. I want to show a slide deck and give a very brief introduction to Mussar, and then a particular practice that I think will get at some of the things Yehudah is talking about here. And then we'll have time for questions and open discussion for the last 15 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. So this is Mussar's Anti-Racism Practice. And again, this is our logo inside of Wisdom in Action. So I'm going to pick up now where Yehudah left off. So Mussar is a 1,000-year-old genre in Judaism. And I know some people on this call have familiarity with Mussar, some have just heard of it. So I'm going to give just really on one foot, on Regal Achat, a little background before we look at how this could be useful in taking on implicit bias. The main question that this discipline called Mussar comes to deal with, and Mussar literally means ethics, instruction, discipline. The modern Hebrew word for ethics is Mussar. And it's a genre that goes all the way back to the Bible, to the book of Leviticus, be holy because I am holy. But it all really picks up as a particular genre about 1,000 years ago. And the question it's coming to answer is, how do we live our values? Love your neighbor as yourself. Treat every person as Salam Elohim. Like, we have these great ideas in Judaism, and they're very hard to live. And what Mussar comes to do is to give us practices to how to actually live these things. And that's what this genre is about. And there's a central idea that one of the great Mussar teachers, Rabbi Shlomo Volbe, writes about, that the deep reality of the universe is connection. And he writes there that we're made of dust and ashes, so we are connected to the material, the mineral world. We grow like plants, so as humans, we're connected to the plant world. We're very similar to animals. And he said, and there's really no such thing as races. All humans are very deeply connected to each other. And so that's the reality, deep reality of the universe. He says, that's not the way, we live. If you look at the world, that's not what's happening. We have war, we have all kinds of terrible things. We have, people being locked up for trying to get asylum. We have all kinds of terrible things happen. And all kinds of separation, distance between people. And so he says that if you look at the word for cruelty in Judaism, which is achzariyut, the root of that, as Ibn Ezra, one of the great medieval commentators on the Torah, points out, the root of the word achzar is kizar, like a stranger. And so when we make others like strangers, that's where cruelty can come in. And that's what happens in the world. We estrange from each other, and we estrange from ourselves, and we estrange from God. And so Mussar is coming to bridge that gap and to address where those places we get estranged from our highest values, from what we know about ourselves, from our deep inherent closeness with the world. And so again, Mussar is one way of understanding it is from Psalm 34, Sur mira ve'aseh tov, turn from wickedness and do good. Turn from evil and go in the direction of good. That's what Mussar really tries to get us to do. It's an old genre, as I said before, all the way back to the Torah, 1,000 years of literature. That's Maimonides, or what it looked like. And it's in every corner of the Jewish world, the Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, Sephardi. The literature really grew out of Spain in the 10th, 11th century. And then, developed and traveled all over the world, Turkey, Israel, up into the Ashkenazi world in Europe. And in the 19th century, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who was the really greatest Torah scholar of his day, founded the modern Mussar movement. And he founded it, one of the line here, making yosher as important as kosher. Tava yosher, Uri L'Tzedek's certificate for restaurants that really treat their workers well. That was a big thing for him, and that was what the Mussar movement came to do, was to say, we can keep kosher and eat kosher food, but are we really yosher? Are we actually acting with integrity, with these values of reliability, trust, responsibility in our business dealings in all parts of our lives? And Rabbi Salanter realized that you can study these ideas and they can stay in your head, but unless they break down to your heart and get into your heart, you're not going to really change. And so the Mussar movement that he developed had all kinds of practices involved with it to travel what was said to be the farthest distance in the world from the head to the heart, and to really get the heart to feel what the head knows, in the words of Rabbi Eliyahu Lopian, who was one of the great Mussar teachers in the 20th century. So Mussar is based on an idea that we're all created in the divine image, central Jewish idea, and we each have a personalized soul curriculum, as the term that was coined by my colleague and teacher Alan Marinis. And on that soul curriculum, we have particular traits that keep coming up and we keep stumbling with. Some it's truth-telling, some it's responsibility, some relationships. And Mussar is the Jewish discipline to help us live with mastery on our soul curriculums. And one last general comment before I hone in on a particular trait that I think will be useful for our discussion today. Rabbi David Lappin, another great Mussar teacher, talks about the midot, are the soul traits. Midah means a measure of something. And in the medieval world, they thought that people had a measure of patience or a measure of trust or a measure of, in some kind of physical sense. And so we call these character traits, like patience and trust and humility, we call them midot. And the analogies to an airplane, just like a pilot has instruments to tell how high the plane is flying, an altimeter, so we have instruments to tell us how we're doing in our lives. We have our bodies, our physical, what kind of physical shape are we in? We have our emotions. Are we happy, sad? What kind of mood? What's happening emotionally for us? We have the quality of our relationships and what's happening in those relationships. It gives us information about how we're doing. And we also have our spirituality, our relationship with God, with Torah. Those all give us information. So just like the pilot wants to change the direction of the plane and go down, they're not going to press on the altimeter because that's just an instrument. Same with us. If I'm having a problem with my wife or with my colleague and I'm getting in a fight with them, or I come home late, 3 nights in a row, my wife is angry at me, I'm not going to press on her because that anger she's having in me, that's just giving me information. I have to look at my traits, my soul traits, my midot. And so just like the pilot will hit the down button, these traits are our controls. So for example, maybe I'm coming home late every night. That's an issue with my kavod, with my dignity and honor I'm giving to my wife, and I need to look at that. Maybe it has to do with my seder, my organization, and why am I staying late, and have to look at that. So Mussar is about that, about understanding which traits are being activated at different times, and then working on them through learning Torah about them and all kinds of practices I'm going to get into in a minute. So that's a background, and again, we'll open up for questions in a few minutes. But just put stuff in the chat if you have questions. What I want to do is I wanted to look at a particular trait right now, and how it could be applicable to what Yehudah was talking about. So this trait is chesed. One of the most well-known chesed, loving kindness, one of the most well-known Jewish traits. And Rabbi Volbe, who I mentioned before, has a beautiful teaching on this, and he bases it on the story in the book of Exodus, when the Jewish people were being oppressed by Pharaoh for so many years. And then it says the king died and the people groaned. And then it says God heard their groan. And the interpretation of that verse, that God heard and looked on them, is that God kept God's gaze on them. And so Rav Volbe writes, until this point in the Egyptian exile, Hashem, God, hid God's eyes from them. This is an attribute of Hester Panim, a hidden face. That's a mystical idea that when there's suffering in the world, God's face is hidden. And so during that slavery, God's face was hidden. And the moment he did not hide his eyes from them, God saw them and heard their groan, the redemption began. And Hashem called Moshe to be his messenger of redemption. And then we get the whole scene of Moses and the burning bush. So Rav Wolbe continues, when Hashem created the human in his image, it was not just that Hashem gave from his honor to humans to crown them with the exalted attributes of intellect and good soul traits, right? That's usually how, when we say we're made in the divine image, that's usually how most of our commentators understand it. So we have a mind and creativity, and we have traits, but Hashem also endowed humans with the power of something called ha'arat panim, which is literally the shining countenance or an illuminated face. Ha'ara means, ha'ara is illumination, and panim is the face. Also with the shining face of a person is hidden a treasure of blessing and grace. The secret of the shining face in humans is something called da'at, or understanding. Deep, that's relational understanding. So the power of meditation and good attention without turning away. That's the ability we have as humans to really empathize with someone else and to really see them and to open our hearts to them with the way we look at them and the way we listen to them. That's this power of harat panim. So just as Rashi explains about Hashem paid attention to them and did not hide his face, Moshe made a similar comment regarding, Rashi made a similar comment regarding Moshe. So a little bit later in the Torah, well, actually, this is a little bit earlier, it describes Moses coming out of Pharaoh's palace and seeing the Israelites, his brothers, who he's been estranged from, suffering under the slavery. And it says that he saw this, and he saw their suffering, and he saw an Egyptian striking one of his brothers. So Rashi claims there, when it says he saw their suffering, he says he looked and paid attention. He gave over his heart, is the literal Hebrew, to feel their distress. He really had empathy for them. And so Rav Wolbe goes on and says that Moshe was connected to this secret of understanding and the shining face, this ha'arat panim. Because of this, he was fitting to be the messenger of redemption. So it's and this, I'm stepping out of the text here, it's really this ability that every single one of us has to shine our warmth and to really see another person. That was the element that made Moses the messenger of redemption. So now Rav Wolbe writes, we're going to go a step further in our practice and try a practical step. And this is the practical step I want to offer to us. He says that this soul trait of the shining face, the harat panim itself, is an actual behavior, concrete behavior mentioned by Shammai the elder in Pirkei Avot. So Shammai says over there, make a fixed time for Torah, say little and do much, and greet every person with a friendly, bright, pleasant face. What in Hebrew is called sever panim yafot. So Rav Wolbe writes that this is a practical application of the shining face. This is a great thing. What our rabbis call giving peace, nitinat shalom, is not simply an expression. One who gives a friendly face to his fellow actually gives him peace. And that's also in the Talmud, the idea, the term for greeting someone is nitinat shalom. And so the practice is, this is something I want you to think about, and I want us to think about this in terms of challenging implicit bias, is a sever panim yafot, a shining face practice. So this is, when I looked up in Google Images, Moses' shining face, this is what came out, in addition to Michelangelo's statue. So I like this. So Mussar is a very practical discipline, as Yehudah was saying before. It's very, it's about the head and the heart. And it's very based on that through action, we change the heart quicker than through our heart, we change our actions. And so a couple of practices we do in Mussar are something called a focus phrase, where we say something every morning for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and you repeat it out loud. So there's this phrase from Pirkei Avot, from Shammai the elder. It's a 2,000-year-old focus phrase, where he says, greet each person with warmth. Greet each person with a shining face. Greet each person with a shining face. And that's a line you could say for a minute. I greet people with my warmth. I greet people with a shining face. And you kind of see what you feel as you say it, and see what ideas come up in your mind as you say it. And you can think about particular people. And then the action Kabbalah in our context is offer a warm greeting to 3 people that you have negative implicit bias about 3 times each day. So this could be, it really could be any implicit bias. We have implicit bias about like everything, really, as Yehudah was telling us, that we're trained, this is part of our human heritage and biological heritage. But the thing, if you want to try to challenge racism, or you want to try to challenge sexism, or whatever it is, where you have some implicit bias, what we find is that just making contact with people who you have that implicit bias about. So let's just say if it's about racism towards people of color and you're a white person, that would be figuring out if you have contact with people of color at all during your day. And now, you know, in this reality we're in of all online, it's a little bit different, a little more challenging. But how could you make a warm connection where you might otherwise, your implicit bias might be person of color, you know, scary, I need to stay away, or danger. How can you make contact there? And that would be the practice. And you can tweak it, adjust it, how it makes sense. And so I'm going to stop the share here. And I really want us to think. We have a bunch of time left. I really want people to do a journal exercise right now and think about, because we can't do breakouts, but think about in your journal. And we'll take this about 3-4 minutes for this, and then I want us to come back and talk together. What would a practice look like for you if you were going to do an implicit bias practice with chesed, with this practice of sever Penimiyut? What might that look like? And even in this COVID-19 era, you know, we're all online. Like, what is a step towards making some contact that you could do to challenge your implicit bias that you could do on some kind of regular basis? Okay, so let's take we'll go to 3-4 minutes right now. I'll set a clock here. We'll hear the bell go off, and then I'd like to open it up and look at questions and discuss this and see how we can apply this and apply Mussar to what we're trying to do here. So please go ahead and write if you have a piece of paper, or just write on your computers or your phones. Okay, that's time. Let's come back together. And Great. So I want to open it up. We have some time here. Love to hear from people. What did you come up with? What could be a practice? And again, the way Mussar works, if we're like doing this as a Mussar practice, we would be a group. We would be doing this for a week or 2 weeks, and then we would be checking in, and we'd be doing it every day and journaling about it, and really holding each other accountable for this kind of thing. I'd love to hear what are some things that people thought might be a way you could apply this. And just take yourself off mute. Just someone jump in if they want to, or they could raise their hand if they want to do that, or just jump in.
I believe Linda raised her hand.
Okay, please.
Yeah, I tend to smile at people, and and in this era, going out with a mask, I realize I don't have the facility to acknowledge a person, so I try to nod. But I think being aware of how a person is different from me, noticing somebody, noticing the difference, and being consciously aware of it, and then responding in a very deliberate, warm manner, just with people passing on the street. But I think also, if I'm acting on an assumption, like I was interested with the riddle, I knew the story, and I knew my own bias against female doctors, but somebody else wrote about a 2-male parent family, and it was like, oh, of course, that one I didn't think about. And so it's, again, being aware of it, and then saying, look, this is what came to mind. I got to acknowledge it. That's there. That's what happened to me. That's my bias. It's coming out.
Yeah. Right. Thanks, Linda.
I have something too, so if you turn it this way.
The smile. Is that Sam? Is that Sam speaking?
Yeah.
Yeah, Sam, go ahead. And
really, sorry?
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
The smile is really interesting because I remembered an email that I subscribed to from a professional communicator coach for business people and others. And one of her comments this week, I'm trying to, of course, click it up so I don't misquote her, is on dealing with video conferences. Her last comment was, smile, you're on camera. And it's really interesting. She says, smiling in person is much more natural than trying to force a smile while sitting in front of a screen. For most of us, it feels fake. However, to a viewer, you can actually look like you're frowning if you're not smiling. The smile also helps to connect. So I thought that, gee, maybe if smiling is important just because if we don't smile, people may make the conclusion incorrectly that we're actually annoyed at them or angry instead of being neutral. So I really like the smile idea.
Yeah, that's very, very powerful. That's great. I see, sitting with Linda. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, am I on?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I wrote this. Make a point.
Say your name.
I'm Bob with Linda. Wait, now I just went off. Okay. Make a point of contacting people during this COVID quarantine and big caps, and be sure to include those who, by bias of past exposures, implicit, unconscious, and also conscious, reach out. Be sure to use the same messaging and concerns for all, as well as elements unique to your own relationship.
Yeah. No, totally. And that's like the, Volpe writes about that you can't just be like, it can't exactly be the same thing. It needs to be based on the relationship you have with them, right? So you're thinking, like, you have elements of all these relationships. You want to bring that in, to all of these. You want to make it unique to those people. Yeah. Thank you.
So I have a story from the before time when I used to walk through downtown Philadelphia to go to work. And unfortunately, the homeless situation in Philadelphia is a real problem here, and it's a big concern. And I often stop to talk to people, but I don't always. Just too many people to talk to as you go through town. but I spoke with one man who was talking about how people didn't look at him because he was too ugly. And it was, he took it all on himself. And I feel confident that people didn't look at him because injustice is hard to look at. But for him, people didn't look at him because he wasn't worthy of being looked at.
Right.
I try very hard to connect with people when I walk.
Yeah. No, that's the what I hear in there is the impact of the internalized oppression. It's just that then people make this, and that's with implicit bias. Like if people react to them in a certain way, they then internalize it, and that's a particularly heartbreaking interpretation. Yeah.
If I could jump in, I think just as the slow drip of our actions can start to change our psyche and the associations that we have, so do our actions cause a slow drip for people impacted by them, right? And I remember the first few times I noticed as I was a kid and grew into my full stature, 6 feet, I was 14, and I went from just being a cute kid to now people saw me as this scary black man, right? And the first time I, walking down the street and someone crossed the street as I was coming towards them, and I was like, that can't be. But then by the 10th time, you start wondering, right? And what impact does that start to do to somebody? Ran to, I'm sorry, I can't see your name, fam, but the boss says JCRC webinars. Sorry, what's your name? Batya, yes. That's to Batya's point, right? That the impact that has to that homeless person's psyche, that people couldn't even give him the dignity to look, right? It's a slow drip, but it can really have massive impact.
Right.
Which then takes on a whole second level right now, where I live in Denver, Colorado, and go out for walks in the neighborhood at night, and people here are not wearing masks in certain neighborhoods. I've noticed real differences in areas. So I am crossing the street all the time, and found myself when I crossed the street, when a black man was walking towards me, I was like, I don't want him to think it's because it's a black man. It's because it's a person without a mask on, right? And like, this is a narrow area. And so I feel like it took on a whole other level of, normally I would have not even thought twice about it in so many ways. And now I feel like there's this heightened level of the ways that we're interacting and the potential messages that people can walk away from. They decide to walk away from that are not at all what is the intention behind my actions.
Stu, go ahead.
We hear a lot about the way in which families of color, particularly those that have young boys, have what I guess I've heard referred to as the talk. And that is the discussion about what happens when a young man of color is, in particular, this is for young men, is out in the community, and should they be stopped by a police officer, and how it is that they should act, and more importantly, how it is that they're advised not to act. The question that always comes to my mind is, do any of us who are white ever have the talk with our children about the way in which their peers of color are going through life and having to deal with these kinds of issues and challenges? I don't know if that's relevant to what we're talking about, but it is something that I think about a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Stu.
Yeah.
I think I hear that and that about building empathy. I'm trying to get a sense of what other people's lives are like. Did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, just to say, I certainly think it would be important. It could be a part of that, at least for you as the parent, right, to take the active care to on behalf of other people of color in the society to make clear to the next upcoming generation of white folks the experiences that we go through on a day-to-day basis, right? And that act of care will help undo unconscious associations for you, right? As well as helping to educate others.
Right. Great. Fred, did you want to jump in? Yeah, I'm really struck by this act of care that Yehudah's been emphasizing for us. That it's these acts of care that are the contradiction or the move against the implicit bias that is telling us of a message of this is not a person to care about. In some way, this person is less human than you. In some way, whatever that is, and that's the building block of the achzar that Rav Wolbe talks about, of the kizar, of the distancing and the dehumanizing and the estranging of the other, of those little messages that this person's, because they're different from you, they don't deserve your care. So Yehuda's emphasizing here that's every little act of care that we can put in the direction against what the implicit message is, that is a move that is eroding racism. And we're talking now on a really personal level. Obviously, there are systemic things that you had talked about before also that need to be addressed at our level of our schools and our shuls and our camps and all that. But here we're really talking on the personal level, that these small acts of care, that's the work. That's the work. And what Mussar gives us is a Jewish framework for doing that work, based in Torah, and then with a sense of accountability around it. But Uri, so you're gonna jump in?
Just to say, I think you're exactly right, Rabbi. And, on an institutional level, kind of what I was getting to before, you could see, you can make the move on an institutional level to say, as a community, we're going to start prioritizing certain learning, right? And that would be an institutional effort to start to shift associations and biases on an institutional level, right? That we're going to actually really center a certain set of customs, traditions, and histories as in-depth learning.
Yeah. One of the things I know. Oh yeah, go ahead, Linda, please.
Yes, going to the institutional level, one thing that's bothered me for a long time, and I've talked to other people about the educational materials that Jewish children have and who's depicted in them. And so that white only is kind of normalized in most American institutions. And I have this idea that I would love to have like a Brown-in where people go and take all those children's biblical stories and color in the people who clearly didn't look like this. They were more brown-skinned, and that would normalize it not just for the Jewish kids of color, but also for the white kids, so that it's like, yeah, of course, they were always a part of our community.
Right. I love that idea. It's a real reclamation of truth, Yeah, it's a great idea. Other things I know people do are, a colleague of mine has a law firm. He runs a law firm, and he's put up pictures. He's a white guy, and he's put up photographs of very accomplished black scholars, lawyers, poets, writers all over the office to counter the implicit bias that's there, the racist bias that a lot of people aren't accomplished in these kind of ways, and that's a step. That's a more of a systemic type of step that they're doing. There's also a big effort that I've been seeing in the Jewish community more recently around also bringing in understanding of more Mizrahi and Sephardi traditions and learning and texts, and it's still like a way long way to go, but I am seeing that more. That's more happening, and so I'm thankful for that.
Okay, before we break out into any last questions, I just wanted to say thank you to Yehudah and to Rabbi David for really walking us through this really an in-depth personal process of addressing your own internal bias. And I think it's important that we sometimes always highlight other people, right? Like we always are quick to highlight others' racism, and we never really fall back on our own implicit biases. And I think that it is one of the most crucial acts of improving oneself is to really step back and look at your own internal biases and saying, how can I improve? So that this has just been amazing. I also want to give a huge shout out to the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable for helping make this possible. And I think that one of the best things to make true tangible change is to have these tough conversations within our own communities, within our own families, and within our own circles of friends. So thank you, everybody. We have about 5 more minutes if somebody wants to go ahead and ask some questions to both of our presenters. We'll go ahead and open that up right now. To make sure that everybody doesn't talk at once, if you can go ahead and type your question, that would be amazing.
And let me just say that we would invite people to be in touch regarding any efforts you make in these areas where you try things out, like small acts of care, ground them in chesed. If you try out this sever panim yafot practice of the shining of the face in whatever ways you're able to do that in this era of masks, we'd love to hear about it. And so you may have my email, I'm not sure, but you can reach me at insideoutwisdomandaction.org.
I love that. I love that. Yes. So did anybody go ahead and type any questions? We do have about 5 more minutes.
Can I throw it back to Yehudah and Rabbi David, which is if you had your wish of things you most want people to do, or things that you creatively hear other people suggesting, what are the things that you want to plant?
I mean, one was I really like that idea of the images and putting up images of ways that are that counter your implicit bias. I think also something I've been engaged with is it was pointed out to me, this is not around racism, this is more around sexism, how my curricula as a teacher are almost all male dominated in the voices I draw on. And as I teach traditional Jewish text, so it's challenging, but still, I was realizing that's how I'm acting out my male domination, is as a teacher, and that's my platform. I curate what I present to people, and I'm not mining the tradition or looking for women's voices as much as I need to. And so that's been something I've been taking on in myself, has been so I've been reading more, the thing I wrote in my journal right now is just listen to, female rabbis' podcasts, listen to, read, female rabbis' blogs, like that kind of thing. So I'm just getting more, saturated with that. So that's the kind of thing I'd want to plant, is whatever it is for you, where your implicit bias that you're wanting to take on, move in that direction, move in the direction of whatever community person that is, and those are a few of the ways. How about you, Yehudah? Do you have something else?
I'll just lift up what Brian Stevenson always says, is get proximate and really seek out relationships and find ways to live these concrete acts of care, right? Because it's less about fostering the feeling, but more about the doing. And as they say, right now, 70 Shema. So this has been great. Thank y'all so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to everybody who joined on today, spending a little bit of their time of day to truly join and learn together. Here at Uri L'Tzedek, it's our mission, as my great mentor, Rabbi Shmuley, always says, we try to bring in a little light when there's a lot of darkness. And it may seem like right now there's so many bad things happening with this virus mess and people losing their jobs. But the fact that a group of people can come together and have deep conversations and truly dive into your own essence and your own self is a miracle within itself. And that's a little bit of light that we get to spread all throughout. So thank you, everybody. We will stay connected. Remember to follow us on Facebook at uriL'Tzedek.com. Go to our website. If you're not part of our email listserv, please go to our website, click on be a part of our listserv, and you will be added. We will be also sending out a copy of this recording. Just so if you have some friends that want to learn about this and maybe missed out, we will be putting that on our email list and our website. So thank you, everybody, for joining. We hope to see you on the next session. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.